Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Feedback from Our Future. This is a discussion focused on community work with Austin children led by Austin PBS, our city's public service television station, and supported by the City of Austin's Corridor Program Office, which focuses on rebuilding city roads. We are here today for your guidance on how our program can improve going forward. Next slide. One more. So children brought our organizations together, and our shared respect for what Austin's children can tell us about how to better educate and support our city's youngest residents. Next slide. So here we are. We are your three presenters for today. I'll let each of us introduce ourselves. Ben, would you and Miriam like to start?
Sure. I'm Ben Kramer. I'm the head of Austin PBS's Educational Services. I've been here for about 10 years. Prior to my work with Austin PBS, I was a school teacher, I was a school principal, and I was a professor of education, helping to bring up next generations of school leaders. Miriam?
Hi everyone, I'm Miriam Mendoza, and I have been with Austin PBS for 5 years. And prior to Austin PBS, I was a preschool teacher. I was a coordinator for a bilingual literacy program and also an education director at an art museum. And I am happy to be here.
And my name is Sabine Romero. I came to this particular project through my community role with the City of Austin's Corridor program, rebuilding the major streets here in Austin. I am actually an elections attorney by trade. A bond election brought me to this transportation project. I've been with the city about 15 years, and it's been an absolute pleasure to be so human-centered in our work in collaboration with Austin PBS. We have another collaborator listening in today. I'd like to welcome our colleagues from Cap Metro, who have already been important to this work and are going to be a big part of future phases, which we'll talk about a little bit. I also want to take this moment hi Melissa, there's Melissa from Cap Metro. Thank you for turning your camera on. She is our superstar. And I want to thank one person who's not present, that is Nikki Acosta. She is the amazing design professional within the Corridor Program Office, who not only designed the deck that we'll be moving through, but also the handouts that Miriam, Ben, and I are going to talk about that have been our main tool to connect with community. She is just an amazing professional, and we would not be here without her. So thank you to Nikki in her absence. All right, next slide. Okay, so how did this collaboration begin? I referenced just a little bit about the context of how we came to work together. So the city of Austin is the 11th biggest city in the United States. And there are many roads in Austin that are struggling to keep up with the city's growth. And so the city has made a point of redeveloping the biggest roads, we call them corridors. And our city council really wanted us to take an unusual approach of making sure that we also paid attention to the human side of our construction work. They wanted us to pay attention to shaping complete communities. That's a concept in the city's Imagine Austin 30-year plan. Next slide. So for council to ask a transportation department to be human-centered really required a different approach to street design. To give you a sense of the scope of the work, on the left on this slide, you see the 8 biggest roads in Austin that are the focus of our work. The orange lines you see here. And at the center of the map, numbered 3, is a road that we call Airport. It used to be the road that our airport was on. Our airport is now farther out of town. However, this is the road that we're focused on in our work in the long run. because Ben will talk a little bit about its importance to Austin PBS. So our goal was to transition Austin's high traffic corridors to more safe and varied uses for the community, pedestrian friendly, viable, equitable public transport. The area of airport is also part of what we call in Austin the Eastern Crescent, like a backwards capital C that lays over the city, that is the basic footprint of our most varied income groups within the city, from our lowest income to our highest income. And our challenge was to infuse sort of this traditional transportation construction process with a focus on connecting with these communities along each corridor. Next slide. Ben, Miriam, I'll let you go from here.
Great. Let me cue it up for Miriam. So the mission of Austin PBS is to inform, engage, and entertain everyone within our approximately 2.3 million person viewing area. Within educational services, we have some more explicit goals within that. One goal is to bring the full array of our non-commercial educational media to everyone, all kids and families, but with a particular focus on those who can most benefit from knowledge of these resources and knowledge of practices on how best to use them. So when we make a decision to sort of go to ground with community, whether we're holding workshops or hosting events, of top priority for us is trying to reach those families and those centers of learning that can really benefit the most from them and help those kids make the most educational gains. Where that comes into the corridor is really interesting. Historically, we have done quite a bit of work along that airport corridor, working with public housing units up and down the stretch, working with public schools that are right on or close to that corridor. And as Sabine mentioned, just keeping a presence in that Eastern Crescent of our viewing area. Another particular note, though, is that very shortly we will be moving into our brand new headquarters. We're relocating after 50 plus years on the University of Texas at Austin flagship campus to the Highland campus, formerly a shopping mall, of Austin Community College. And that just happens to be on Airport Boulevard. So more so than just service, our new home will now be along this corridor. And that was an additional kind of tantalizing element that brought us into getting involved with Sabine, not only to better serve these families and to help engage them around the developments taking place along the places where they live, work, and play, but also to join them as neighbors. And so now Miriam is going to take us a little bit more in depth into the work that we have traditionally done and the new spin that we put on it when we started work with the corridors. Next slide, please.
Yeah, so as Ben mentioned, we have that project that focuses on community engagement, and the name is Learning Neighborhoods, and that has a great tie-in to the Corridors program. So I would like to introduce you to the Molly of Denali Family and Community Learning Workshop. Molly of Denali is a hugely popular PBS Kids show that features Molly, an Alaskan native, and the first Native American to be a lead character in an animated series in US history. And the learning goal of Molly of Denali is teaching children how to use informational text in their environment to navigate their world. Informational text can be a bus schedule, a map, etc. And you can start to imagine why we thought it might be a good fit with the Corridors program office. So Molly of Denali teaches about Alaskan culture and values, and the family engagement program invites children to think about their own community, excuse me, and find connections and similarities in their own lives and histories. So during a Molly of Denali family engagement workshop, we'll watch a Molly of Denali video, we'll play a Molly of Denali digital game, we'll create a hands-on project with informational text, and then we'll share out about animals, places, people, traditions in our local community. And the project focuses on intergenerational learning. And that is why caregivers and children ages 5 to 8 play and learn together in the family engagement workshops. Next slide, please. So as with any collaboration or partnership, we start by looking at our missions and start drawing connections between Austin PBS Ready to Learn and the Corridors Program Office and our shared long-term goals, including a general desire for our community to have streetscapes and public transport as vibrant family spaces with PBS resources integrated. So we are both civic institutions that can work together to benefit families. In both of our work, we want to promote a sense of belonging and ownership for people in our communities. And the idea that our resources are readily accessible anytime, anywhere, supports learning while people move about our city. So,
sorry, go ahead.
Phase 1, which we are currently in, is dipping our toes into inquiry. So what is our baseline with kids? How familiar are they with public transit? How comfortable are they? So it's that qualitative complement to the quantitative measures of how many people ride, what forms of transportation. And phase 2 is a conversation about a bus stop right outside the new Austin PBS headquarters that can possibly point our community to their public television station and the resources and tools we can offer them. Phase 3 is to expand our learnings to the airport corridor, where we can begin to help children and their families travel to Austin PBS headquarters using public transit, and then in the future, possibly reach communities in other corridors in the city. Next slide. So again, Sabina, did you want to say something?
No, go ahead, please share this slide. Absolutely.
Okay. So again, some of the natural parallels between us was that we are both regional civic entities. We are both interested in improving quality of life, especially for higher needs communities. And there are educational tie-ins of using informational text, such as maps, websites, to navigate communities. So in the process, can we make some of the learning goals of Molly of Denali immediately relevant to the lives with public transport? Offering samples of what's available and what's to come. And could we acquire information that would help complete communities think about engaging kids and families currently living in public housing? So Austin PBS has community partnerships that gives us access to families in need. And through these partnerships and through the relationships that we start forging with the families that participate in our Molly of Denali workshop, we start building trust. So can the Corridors Program Office leverage that access to families and that built-in trust to bring complete communities inquiries and engagements to learning neighborhood convenings? And from the feedback we collect, could we improve the public transit experience?
Absolutely.
Next slide. Okay, so as intermission, Sabina, would you like to introduce this activity?
Well, I am going to share with all of you this table exercise, which is a way of creating a profile, a persona for all of our participants. Ben, you want to talk a little bit about who sits at each table here and what it tells us about our group today?
Sure. So we use this activity frequently in our outreach, and we find it's a really fun kind of icebreaker that helps folks situate themselves in their PBS Kids past and present and maybe even future. For those of you who grew up in the United States, there is a strong possibility that you will connect strongly with one or more of these tables. And so we'll ask you to kind of identify your home base and get ready to respond to a poll. So make sure you can connect the table to the number next to it. If you did not grow up in the US, there is also a strong possibility that some of these characters have made their way to you no matter where you grew up. And if you are outside of the PBS Kids realm entirely, as for your own lives, perhaps there are children in your midst. And if those children are viewers of PBS Media, perhaps they too have a table. So if you don't have one for yourself, feel free to choose one for the children in your lives. So we're going to, in just a moment, put up the poll. Take a moment to locate your table and get ready to answer with a number.
While you study the characters, I just want to share that I, for example, really connect with Table 2. Fred Rogers and Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was the gentleman in the upper left-hand chair of Table 2 was a part of my youth. And bottom left-hand corner of that table, Rita Moreno in Electric Company, those two, Sesame Street, Big Bird, the bird at the right, Electric Company and Sesame Street were back to back for me on Austin PBS. And my mother always knew when I was watching Austin PBS because there would be a collection of melted ice cream spots all along the rug at the corner in front of the TV. And that's how she knew I had been sitting there watching Austin PBS. So I'm a table 2.
We've had several reply in chat that they have several tables in mind. This is hard. We're going to have to ask you to choose one. But know that it is a non-binding decision. We won't hold that to you for the rest of the seminar.
Anonymous.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and put up the poll.
You have any bets, Ben? Do you have any predictions?
I do. I think we are going to see a bunch at table 3.
Oh, I'm going to give everyone a reminder just in case they want to refute or confirm. Table 3 was where Carmen Sandiego was sitting. Table 4 is coming out. That's where we have the Magic School Bus. We're getting good distribution. The lunchroom is pretty full now. Maybe I'm 3, 4, and 5 are showing the strongest. Eliza, you tell us when enough people have voted.
Great, we'll give it maybe 20 more seconds, but it looks like we've gotten some good responses so far.
Yeah, there's some logistics to logging in here.
Mm-hmm. Well, it looks like we're pretty stable now. So unless, please drop in the chat if you still need some time. Oh, there we got another response.
Come on, table 3.
So close, so close. All right.
All right.
Ben, you want to break down the psychology of table 4?
No, that's Miriam's task here. She's much better at it than I. So let's bring back the slide and Miriam can conduct some impromptu analysis.
Okay, so table 4. We have Magic School Bus, Mrs. Frisell or Miss Frisell. We have Arthur, and then Reading Rainbow, and Bill Nye the Science Guy, and then Zoom. Okay, so Ben, do you want to tell them how long Arthur has been in 4th grade or 3rd grade?
You know what? Table 4 is fascinating because if you look at least 3 of the characters, 2 human and 1 aardvarkian, they have been in the news a lot lately. LeVar Burton, of course, has been in the running to be a host of Jeopardy and has is working on launching his own sort of follow-up to Reading Rainbow. Bill Nye the Science Guy, of course, has been deep in conversations about climate change and about scientific information. Has kind of really at the forefront of helping to clarify scientific understandings since the show premiered in the 90s or even earlier. And then Arthur. Arthur has just finished their 25th season of new episodes. Just last week or the week before, they aired the final new episodes. Arthur will continue to air, and new assets in online games and other activities are continuing to be developed around Arthur. But what's fascinating about the last episodes of Arthur is if you catch the very last one streaming at pbskids.org, you can see grown-up Arthur and the cast of characters as adults. And it's really, really fun to see how they turn out according to the author and the developers of the show. So really topical. Table 4, all of you guys who chose them, you're both nostalgic and up on the latest. So congratulations.
Next slide. Okay, in the remaining slides and remaining time that we have together, we're going to catch everyone up a little bit on the phase 1 that Miriam described, this interaction with kids that is the learning phase, one of the learning phases for our later collaborations in phase 2, 3, and beyond. As I mentioned, our resident artist, Nikki Acosta, provided these educator-informed, human-centered designs. And what we attempted to do was, Miriam was had already done the very careful legwork and pre-work of finding families who were willing to do virtual sessions, several sessions over several weeks. Each around a Molly of Denali topic. And so the question was, how would we build off of those Molly topics to get the kids to share their personal stories? How could their stories provide insights to their life traveling our corridors? And how could we use that dialogue to bring about better, not just better education outcomes, but also better transportation outcomes infused with equity and with justice? Next slide. So first and foremost, we had to design for kids. So Miriam is going to talk first about how we crosswalked from the Molly lesson themes to transportation themes. This was our first challenge in trying to meet kids where they are. Miriam, would you like to talk about those 2 points?
Yes, so in the Molly of Denali workshops, we have 4 themes. The first one is investigating animals. Then we have learning about people in our community, followed by exploring our community, so actual places that were favorite spots for the children. And then lastly, celebrating traditions. So celebrating our diversity and our backgrounds and where we come from. So we took those 4 skills and we related them to public transportation so that we could have a smooth transition from the Molly lesson to what we call corridor moments. And we did this so that we could gather information about the transit experience, but at the same time, we were reinforcing the lessons that the kids had just learned. So we incorporate it without over-explaining. So for example, in the first session, when we were investigating Molly's surroundings, we talked about modes of transportation in Alaska. I explained that Alaska modes of transportation may be similar or different from our own, and we reflected on the modes of transportation in our community. So in Alaska, Molly's mom is a pilot. So she flies an airplane to get supplies for their town. If Molly and her friends want to get across a body of water, they take a canoe. If they want to get from one place to another, they could walk with their snowshoes or get on a dog sled. So I asked the children to think about their own surroundings here in Austin and how they get from one place to another. So the first handout asked them, what transit do you use the most? And what do you use the least and why? And we had a conversation about that. The second session was about learning about people in the community. So kids create a short bio sketch about their caregiver or a special adult in their lives. And for the quarter moment, we transitioned to asking, who is the adult in your life who makes decisions about the way you travel around town? Who is that grown up in your house that you go out into the world with when you get in a car or get in a bus or walk down the sidewalk? And then the third session was about exploring our community, and the kids get a paper map of our city, and they are asked to open it and find different things such as the airport or parks, etc. And then we took that opportunity to then present a quarters moment handout with a map of their neighborhood, right? That's more familiar to them. That's more relevant than a map of the entire city. So it gave the children an opportunity to strengthen their map reading skills so that in the future, they could possibly help their family navigate their public transportation system using maps. Mm-hmm. And the fourth session was about celebrating traditions, and the handout was a map of their neighborhood featuring their community library as a place where they can research about world cultural traditions. And again, it was an opportunity to reinforce their map reading skills. It was celebrating points of pride in their neighborhood in relation to their home. So as you can see, we made these deliberate correlations between what was being presented in a model lesson and what we were inquiring about in a corridor moment. So we drew a connection in a seamless way, in a conversation, in a relevant connection at a level that resonates with a child. Sabine?
Exactly. And as we tested each document a few times. We tested it with staff, we tested it with PBS, and then we tested it with kids. And the first kids who experienced the handouts, their feedback and the results they gave us resulted in micro adjustments that benefited the next set of kids. And likewise, those outcomes will benefit the next round of kids. We are not done with this phase one, so there's still an opportunity. If any of you see opportunity for improvement, we'll absolutely integrate that into the final version. And because there's so many iterations and sort of firsts and lasts, what I did was I created a whole separate deck, which you can find at this short URL here, that shows you each handout, the first version and the final version, so you can see some of the progress and some of the things that informed changes to each. And what we'll do here, we'll spend our time talking about some of the higher sort of 30,000 foot view lessons that we took away from the full experience. Next slide. So we want to talk a little bit about language. There's 3 of these slides, 3 big takeaways. When it came to language, we all had to adjust our approach. Adults accustomed to writing and communicating with adults, we all needed to adjust that to make sure that the language we chose spoke to these 5 to 8-year-olds. So what worked? We found that the more straightforward the directions, the better. You'll see in the versions of the handouts, in initial versions, the directions might have been lengthy. By the end, they were much shorter. Simple and direct prompts. The more wordy we got, the more room there was for, I don't even want to say confusion, because every understanding is valid, just different interpretations. So we simplified and directed prompts. We moved to more age-specific and diverse images. You'll notice we don't even use human hands. We use sort of PBS-style hands. Also trying to take into consideration, we don't want anyone to feel left out of what they're seeing represented in the images. And then ensuring that both languages gave an equal amount of direction. We had an English version and a Spanish version, and we knew that we needed to make sure that was correct. And Miriam, you want to speak a little bit to that? You had a very good example.
Yeah, so in this image that you see here, you see that it's bilingual. And this is not the final version. This is a draft version, because if you notice, under train, it's translated as entrenar, which is the equivalent of like training for a marathon or training for Olympics, not a train. So we had to change that to tren, right? There was another case in which translation was confusing in the sense that it's not in this one, but it would say draw a square around the type of transportation you use the least. And then the Spanish version would say draw a circle. And so you can see how the kids who might be more versed in English might be doing a different instruction, and their parents who might be more versed in Spanish might be like, you're doing it wrong. So just very, very deliberate about having correct translations.
Yes. So translations, sometimes they worked, sometimes they didn't. Other things that definitely didn't work, terms of art, we simplified things down to talk about concepts in a way that a 5 or 8-year-old would talk about them. Again, length. And then in this particular handout, we included an activity for after the event, but we realized that everything needed to be able to be completed during Miriam's time with them to ensure that we could receive the feedback in the right order. Next slide. Equity. Equity is another issue that definitely came into play. And what do we mean by equity? Equity is different from equality. Equality is everyone having the same thing. However, equity is everyone having what they need to be able to do the same thing. And that might be different for different kids. So for example, this is the draw your path in green lesson, as we like to call it. Miriam, you want to talk a little bit about the equity element of instructions and how that affected this exercise?
Sorry, I was on mute. When I asked the families, please make sure to have crayons handy so that you can complete this activity. Well, some families came back to me and said, we don't have crayons around the house. Did you need us to go buy some? And I was like, and these are low-income communities. So I was like, no, don't go out and buy anything. And so it was clear to me that we had made an assumption, right? And so we needed to provide, if we were going to ask them to draw in green, we needed to provide a green crayon in each of bag of their materials. And so luckily I had a set of crayons, 64 set of crayons in my house, and it comes with a little box with a bunch of green crayons. And so we were able to include those for the next iteration.
And another version of equity in this conversation is, can every child see green? Does every child know what green is? Because we're also dealing with an age range. And so we learned a great deal from what seemed like a pretty straightforward request of having a kid draw on a map. So what worked? Straightforward language within age group comprehension, again, using references to the map to provide comprehension confirmation. Like if kids can interpret an instruction many different ways, how can we provide some sort of guardrails by making the map part of their comprehension, for example, as we empower them to be map readers in their family. What didn't work? Again, requiring every family to have access to a specific item or tool, such as the draw your path in green. Next slide. So here is a summary of where we are so far with the feedback. We had 5 families participate in round 1. We had 15 respond in round 2, and we're still planning round 3. And, and some people might very, very well ask, is 20 families enough to inform a really big endeavor? And this is where human-centered design comes in, where the qualitative measure comes in at great value, which is when we have an opportunity to do a deep dive with a family and talk to them over an extended period of time in a professional back and forth, we can glean more details and information from each respondent in that qualitative setting than we would if we had simply, for example, asked them to answer a yes/no question in a quantitative survey. And that's where human-centered qualitative feedback complements metrics and quantitative feedback. I really feel like we need to merge those two. And Austin PBS is a natural professional in that regard, but that's something that's not a familiar tool for something like transportation construction. And so this was really an opportunity to check our quantitative work by talking at length with families about their comfort zones with what they have, comfort zones with what we're planning to build, and their ability to utilize it well, either because they can read a map to know how to reach a place, or realize on a map that they're actually closer to a train than a bus, and that's something that they could learn more about. We learned that the family car is still essential. We can talk a great deal about bikes and buses and walking. However, every family consistently describes their reliance in this large city to reliance on a car. When kids are familiar with the bus, it's usually the school bus and not yet the public bus. So there's lots of opportunity to grow there. And while the baseline might be that families don't use a great deal of public transportation, a baseline is so important to push off of for purposes of measuring our progress. So while it may not seem like the best feedback to receive, it's important feedback to know, so that when we look back in future years at the incredible successes that I'm confident the program will have, we'll be able to see how far we came. You know, people always talk about destinations and timing for public transit. And our friends at Cap Metro just did this beautiful redesign of our system, and people are getting used to these new layouts. And our city is growing so fast that this is definitely something that we all pay attention to all the time. And we definitely want people to feel like they have choices in how they get around our town. Trains are relatively new to the city. We found that a lot of families were unfamiliar with the train, even though, as I mentioned, the map showed them that they're actually, some of them, physically closer to a train stop than to a corridor where they may already go for a range of different services. So there's just so much potential that the preliminary feedback is showing. Miriam or Ben, would either of you like to add to this slide before we move on? No? Okay.
No.
Next slide. All right. So now we have an opportunity to hear from all of you, and we're so excited to be in a room of incredible professionals. We have 3 breakout rooms. I'm going to let each of us talk a little bit about what our room will be collecting notes about. When the descriptions are done, Eliza will explain to everyone how to choose your room, and we'll break out for about 10 minutes and then come back and share across the groups. Miriam, would you like to go first and talk a little bit about what your breakout room is going to focus on?
Yeah, so the breakout room I will be in will focus on feedback processes that work with kids. And I just want to reiterate, this is a breakout room to hear from you. If you have experience with getting feedback from kids, if you have reactions to it, if you have questions about it, this is a time to have that conversation.
Mm-hmm. And then my breakout room is going to be about feedback loops and expectations. Like, how do you know how far out each feedback loop can take you? How far do you jump? And I would love to hear from folks who've had experience either with little jumps or big jumps, and how they ensured that loop with different project magnitudes. Ben?
My group will hopefully be digging into the notion of what happens when we have multi-generational participants in dialogue. How do we ensure that we capture the voices? How do we help them play off of each other? Would love to hear from folks who've had experience or have ideas about how to make that happen.